we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to not take offense to the fact that none of you are in the front row. Hopefully that has nothing to do with my colleague and I here. I believe everybody showered today. But thank you all for coming. Just a quick show of hands if you were at the first public meeting we held for this project. Okay, wow. All right, well, that's great. So clearly this has garnered some interest. Otherwise, just to make sure you're in the right place, we're here to share with you an update on the Route 7 North Shared Use Path Scoping Study. This is a project managed by the town, funded through a bike ped grant with the state of Vermont with V-Trans. And so tonight is the second kind of large-scale public meeting in our scoping study process. This is what's known as the alternatives meeting. So back in, oh goodness, was it July? We held what was called the local concerns meeting, which is generally where we introduce the project, we share kind of some knowledge that we've discovered through research and investigation into existing conditions. We share what the project is going to do, what our goal with evaluating this study area and type of project is, and we hear what folks have to say. If folks like it, if they don't like it, if they have concerns, if they have ideas, we take that input and we inform what are called alternatives. And so these are different options, different ideas for this corridor stretching from just north of St. Albans City up to the Swan border. And so here tonight, we're going to share with you kind of the alternatives we looked at, our development of those and evaluation, and conclude with kind of an open discussion, question and answer session. So if you could, please hold your questions until the end. I can easily jump back to and from any slides if you see and you want to log it. I can easily do so on the computer, but I generally like to talk as little as possible, but I want to make sure you are all informed. So if I do miss anything, you want me to go back, just let me know. Quick agenda for this evening. Going to review the purpose of the project. Going to talk about kind of the scope and schedule. As I just alluded to, we last engaged with everyone in July. We're going to share with you those alternatives and provide with you our take on the analysis, and then just get into general questions and share with you where we go from here. So just a quick introduction of the project team. My name is Drew Gingras. I'm with VHB. We're the consultants brought onto the project by the town. We're working with Megan and Sean at the town. The project is also kind of supported by the city via Chip Sawyer and his involvement down at the city and how it's connecting into their infrastructure. And then the state representative on the project is John Lemieux. V-Trans typically has a relatively hands-off touch on these projects, but the project does exist entirely in their right-of-way. So it's always important to keep them apprised of what we're up to. So the project purpose, every project, every scoping study like this has what's called a purpose and need statement, and I always like to refer to this as our North Star. So as we investigate the project, as we look at the project area, look at the study site, get into alternatives, if we're not addressing the purpose of this project, then we're generally falling short. And so you'll see when we get into the kind of side-by-side comparison of the alternatives that we looked at, we will measure it really against elements of this. So the purpose of the study is to identify and evaluate opportunities to enhance bicyclist and pedestrian connections between St. Albans City, the town, and north along Route 7 up to Swan. And so currently there's a bit of a disjointed sidewalk network. There's some bicycle lanes striped on the roadway. There's shoulders of variable width. There's not a lot of accommodations for these active transportation users, walkers and bikers. It's typically a relatively friendly environment if you have a car and are able to drive, but not everybody has that luxury. And so this project, especially relative to other amenities in the area, like the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, like the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail to the north, there's a desire for a better connection for folks that want to walk or bike, either recreationally or to get to resources, to amenities like work, school, grocery store, etc. Quick recap of our project schedule. We kick this off in the spring. We worked through that kind of existing conditions assessment throughout the spring and the summer. We came to the community in the summer for that first local concerns meeting. Since then, and with the holidays, our intention was to come back to you all earlier than this, but the holidays and the new year kind of snowballed. We wanted wanted to maximize the potential for visibility and attendance at this meeting, so we're holding it today. From here, we'll move into the actual preparation of the scoping study report, which is the final deliverable for this effort. We'll have one more public meeting, which generally occurs at a select board meeting, where we'll present the scoping study's findings to the select board and seek their approval of our recommended alternative. We'll make any final tweaks that come out of that select board presentation to our report, and we'll submit that to both the state and the town for their records. So without further ado, that's generally the scope, the purpose of the project, the schedule. Now we wanted to get into kind of what we've done since we last met. And that is our alternative. So just a quick recap. I apologize. This has a laser pointer, works on the wall, doesn't work on the TV. Couldn't tell you why. Some sort of film on the TV. Fortunately, it's reasonable for me just to walk right up to it. But our study area starts just south of Sheldon Road / the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail here, right in the kind of Hungerford Plaza, and it travels north all the way to the Swanton border. Obviously, we cross a few things along the way: 105, Sheldon Road, Franklin Park West, the gigantic intersection with Vermont 207, Highgate Commons, Walmart, and then we continue north up into Swine. The corridor, as likely all of you know, is quite variable along its length. You have, dense commercial down here in the southern section as you're coming out of the city, as well as up by Highgate Commons. You have kind of like agriculture, lower density in the middle, and then you kind of return to those land uses minus the sizable commercial development of Walmart as you continue north. So you have a much wider road. The road too almost kind of expands and contracts as you continue along. You have a lot of lanes down here, gets narrowed down to 2 lanes, widens out, multiple lanes, and then concludes getting narrower. So it's a very variable cross-section, and that certainly comes into play when we're looking at what alternatives we are considering for better connectivity and better safety for walkers and bikers. And so one of the first exercises we like to do is just confirm our understanding of the study, and that's by looking at what the intention of it is. So this study came to us and it was called a shared use path scoping study, but it's always important to check and actually make sure that you're right sizing the facility that you're creating or planning or studying for your active transportation users. One of the quick checks for that is in what's called the kind of the national standard for bike facility design. They have this little table in there, and this is in the AASHTO Bike Guide. The AASHTO Bike Guide is the national standard for bike facility design, and then when you think about shared use facilities, it has that overlap with pedestrian facilities as well. So it includes this tiny little table that's based on the volume of cars along your roadway as well as the speed. And when you look at kind of our metrics for Route 7 in the study area, the speed limit is predominantly 35 until it actually jumps up to 50 once you get north of Walmart. And then along its length, the AADT, which is basically how many cars there are on average on the road per day, it ranges anywhere along the study area from 10 to 16,000. So when you use this tiny little table over here, you go to the 35 miles an hour and you go to the top of it, which says 10,000 plus, and that's putting you firmly in this shared use path or separated bike lane category. So that was just a little check we did to make sure that, yes, along our study area, when we are talking about alternatives, what we're going to be talking about is a shared use path. For those that might not know necessarily what a shared use path is, if you can picture the MVRT, if you can picture the LVRT, it's generally a minimum of 8-foot wide path that's on an independent right-of-way or immediately parallel to the road, but is by some means separated from the road. It's not a bike lane that's also striped on the pavement. It's not a shared lane where you're biking with traffic. It's on its own alignment, separated from the road, either horizontally or vertically. So that's just a high-level understanding of a shared use path. And so when we kind of zoomed out and looked end to end, knowing what we were going to be talking about was a shared use facility, we kind of eliminated those alternatives. That would be like, oh, what if we did bike lanes and sidewalks? What if we did just bike lanes? What if we did just sidewalks? None of those quite met that purpose and need and followed along with that table I just shared. And truly, too, to meet the needs of the grant application with the state, it needed to be a shared use facility. You need to accommodate walkers and bikers. So that's how we arrived at the shared use path. And when you look at what is available along the corridor, The other thing was that we were to hopefully travel along Route 7, as that is the most direct route. And so really that made our alternatives analysis somewhat straightforward. We decided we were going to look end to end at what a shared use path along the west side of the road would look like and a shared use path along the east side of the road. So we kind of came up with this segmentation that you'll see in later slides, how it plays out. And then we looked at how a combined alternative would potentially perform relative to the corridor end to end. So the goal of this exercise is to identify a shared use path separated from motor vehicle traffic that was, generally speaking, the most desirable. And so in terms of desirability, we referred to that as, or we evaluated these different segments and kind of color-coded them here on the scale of desirability based upon constraints, impacts, and benefits. So constraints as it pertained to right-of-way, sensitive areas, impacts similarly, minimizing or completely mitigating impacts to right-of-way, always a goal, staying within the public right-of-way, minimizing impacts to natural or cultural resources. So as part of all of these studies too, we do historical resources assessments, we do archaeological resources assessments, we look at those elements, and then we look at the benefits. Are we connecting folks on either side of the road or either end of the corridor to the right things? And based upon what destinations might be on which side of the road, that's certainly paramount in this analysis. So the first alternative we looked at was an end-to-end shared use path along the west side. And so what I'm going to do on each of these next 3 slides is just kind of walk down and share like a high-level look. As I was describing earlier, the corridor is really variable as you move up it, and that's what kind of informed our segmentation of it. And so when we look at these different areas, we've kind of associated a little icon with an image. I apologize if this is a little tricky to see those in the back. Again, I'm welcome to come forward, and I can go back to slides if you want to see a little bit more detail. Excuse me, but what we noticed in the kind of southern section here was a lot of excess pavement. There are buffered bike lanes on the road in very short segments. We heard in the first meeting that those aren't terribly utilized. It's not that surprising given the speeds along Route 7, given the volumes. While those facilities are there, as I shared in that little table, they're not necessarily the right size facility. So they're a great idea. It's nice to reallocate that paved space, but because they're not separated from the number of cars that travel along the road and the speed at which they travel, users generally just don't feel safe or comfortable utilizing that facility. So based on the feedback we heard at our first meeting, those are relatively underutilized. And also there's space that's, albeit within the public right-of-way, is utilized for parking for local businesses. Obviously something we're always going to be sensitive to, whether or not it is in private or public right-of-way, something worth being sensitive to. And then just looking at the utilities in the area, there's above-ground utility poles down this whole section. So how can we fit the path here by, reallocating roadway space or minimizing impacts to those utilities or the kind of the uses of the right-of-way outside of the road. So that was the challenge in that southernmost section. In the middle section here, the roadway changes quite a bit. We go down to a 2-lane section with the exception of the 105 intersection where we do have a left turn lane, so it's a 3-lane, 3 travel lane section. Narrower roadway, narrower shoulders. There is, some encroachments very, very close to, if not within the public right-of-way. Generally speaking, buildings are not something you'll see in that close to a right-of-way line, but that's obviously something we are not going to move. So something to be sensitive to as we consider a west side path that stood out to us. Again, just little snapshots along the corridor because at this point in the project, or at this point in a study's goal is not to design a facility, it's to investigate and evaluate a facility. So those are a couple of the notes we made. There's a lot of ditching through this section on both the east and the west side of the road to just kind of accommodate stormwater and transfer it to the west side of the road. Continuing north, kind of looking up into Highgate Commons, that 207 intersection. We have a little bit more space when we get north of 207 relative to different pieces of infrastructure, the right-of-way. we do have at the 207 intersection, we obviously have traffic signal infrastructure. We have a lot of utilities, signal poles, driveways through kind of this section where we have this first image. Something to be mindful of for that west side, how many cars are going to be turning in to access these commercial destinations, these local businesses, and crossing a shared use facility. What happens when we get north of all this and that land use context kind of transitions back to a little bit more rural? We get a little bit more space. The Walmart development built a sidewalk when that was constructed. And then what are we looking at as we continue even further north, an even narrower roadway? Same concerns though, utilities, trees, etc. So what does all that mean when you try to put, or when you're thinking about putting a shared use path along those sections? We develop these visualizations to really kind of put into place what we're talking about here. So this shared use facility, again, we have it shown to scale here at 12 feet. It's important to note that the width of that can vary. So if the project were to get funded to move into engineering design, the width of the path is always something that they consider. Can it be narrowed? To like a minimum of 10 feet if there's a sensitive resource or a potential sensitive property impact? Could we shift it around a utility pole to avoid a relocation? Those are all things that are kind of a little bit further down the road, and when you're into engineering design and you're considering impacts to existing elements of the roadway or of the right-of-way, excuse me. And so this snapshot down here is right in the southern end of the property, just right kind of in front of the Hungerford Plaza, approaching the old newspaper building and the MBRT crossing, just right up here. You can actually kind of see a little warning sign right there just to place yourselves. And then more up in the north here, we're kind of pretty close to the northern end of our section. You can see here we've called for a narrower path just because of the number of trees up here, the utility poles, all things that, again, will be kind of considered if the project were to advance with a preferred alternative. But just looking at, can we maintain that acceptable width of the shared use path, that separation from the roadway, and still kind of successfully and reasonably, feasibly say a shared use path could work here. So that was alternative one. Alternative two, same kind of typical section with a separation from the road, looking at the same sort of things along the east side. So very similarly to the west side option, the east side, as it would be in the southern section here, kind of existing within the what we call curb to curb. So you can picture as the existing roadway. That's what we would seek to do there. As we continue north, looking at, what is access to businesses like through these areas? Is there a lot of driveways? Are there a lot of intersections? This Sheldon Road intersection, it's known that there's a fairly high speed movement made off of that. How can we plan around that? Not really something we look at here, something that would get more into engineering design, but just something to be mindful of and identify as a potential constraint through here. The connection to the MVRT, really nice for something like an east side path if you're coming up from the city and you can just jump right on that, staying on the same side of the road. Potential benefit of the east side option through here. Continuing north, more the same, not too much variability in this middle section between both options, where you have very similar adjacent land uses. And on the west side down here, you have a few additional private properties before you get into more large-scale lots. Similarly, on the right side here, you have a few additional properties. You also have the historic district down here. And then as you transition north, you come up on Franklin Park West. It's a lot of the same. It's a little bit more open space, a little bit more kind of user-friendly when you're considering something, constructing something along the side of the road.
I have a question. When you get to the previous slide, that one and the one before it, the road's only 2 lanes wide at that point. Are there any consideration in your alternatives to the likelihood that the development will be out in that end of town, which means the road will probably double in width, 2 lanes on both sides, or to the city?
No, that was not a consideration with this. Yeah, we didn't. The study did not get into traffic. That would be a recommendation for any future development. We also heard at our first local concerns meeting in the southern section, the amount of pavement out here allows for some illegal passing of left-turning vehicles, so it almost functions as if there's like a two-way left turn lane going down the middle of the road, even though there's not. But so if somebody needs to turn left and there's traffic coming the opposite direction, cars will just utilize the bike lanes to just bypass that left turner. So somebody recommended potentially looking at traffic in the sense of, could you fit both the shared use path and a two-way left turn lane along Route 7 here, such that you could allow a left-turning vehicle or left-turning driver to pull out of traffic to make their maneuver. So that's going to be a recommendation going forward. As far as the traffic that might come from the new development of Franklin Park West, that was not a consideration of the study. I would assume the developer for that effort would need to do what's called a traffic impact study, and they would need to make sure that if additional mitigations are required due to increased traffic volumes, that they are accommodating those as part of their development effort. So this would be very separate from that. But looking at this area, again, just to reorient us, east side, second alternative, almost the northernmost part of our project corridor, right in the area of Highgate Commons and that 207 intersection. Lots of commercial drive access, but also the Highgate Commons key destination, as I understand it, might be receiving some new businesses in coming years, potentially, so a potential even more desirable connection or destination than it is today, but something to be mindful of if there is a shared use path along the east side, really easy access into that location. Continuing north of that, however, the 207 intersection and the way it's currently configured, we see as a potential sizable hurdle to an east side option in this, and that'll kind of come out when we looked at the combined option. But high speed, high volume interchange, treated for all intents and purposes like an interstate on-ramp. Something we would want to be mindful of. Crossing that with walkers and bikers, I think, would be very uncomfortable for both drivers and walkers and bikers. So something we want to be mindful of there. And then just continuing north of this, you get similar land use context on both sides of the road. You have the auto dealership on the east side, similar to the Walmart being on the west side. But then continuing north, again, kind of similar cases on both sides of the road. North of here, we really assessed both with kind of the same desirability ranking and the same considerations for both an east side and a west side path. So similar to alternative one, we took a look at, all right, just visualizing planting a shared use path on both sides of the road in this location. I just realized this is actually mislabeled. This should be more like up here, so apologies about that. So ignore the camera being there, pretend it's here, because that's your dealership and your Walmart on the side there. So, but then this down here at the Maple City Diner, what a shared use path concept could look like on the east side of the road here, crossing that driveway into that local business, and then similarly what a 12-foot wide shared use path in the north section would look like relative to the traffic lanes. Same thing down here relative to the existing space that it would be kind of inserted into. So after we did that exercise, we kind of looked at the desirability ratings of both, and we see kind of very similar up to this kind of northern middle section, and then very similar north of that. So that kind of Highgate Commons 207 intersection area really stood out to us. You can see down here in the southern section, both fairly the same, because we do think there's going to be opportunity to reallocate the paved roadway space. Similar through here, similar context on both sides of the road, sensitivity to, close parallel parcels to the roadway here. Similar through here, then you get the Highgate Commons destination / 207 intersection. Is you could almost, if you wanted to make that even more red, that we see as a significant hurdle, and then fairly similar transition north there. So when we kind of matched those up, we said, all right, for the sake of really doing a full alternatives analysis, we should consider kind of a combined alternative where the path travels along one side of the road for a good bit of distance, and then is it sensible to switch to the other side of the road to minimize impacts to something, to maximize connectivity and user safety, all things that we talked about. And so when we looked at alternative 3, you know, we liked, or when we looked at a third alternative, we liked the east side up until that 207 intersection, and that was kind of twofold. One, to get you to the new Franklin Park West development, to get you to the Highgate Commons Plaza, and then looking at crossing over to the west side of the road, seeing how north of this area, both alternatives kind of had equal desirability rankings, but a transition here avoids that 207 interchange, and we saw that as being the best option for both walkers, or for walkers, bikers, and drivers. So alternative 3 we liked. We'd love to hear some input on a potential crossing location among these two. Maybe we have a short segment where a shared use path does exist on both sides of the road. I think we didn't want to rule one or the other out. We are, again, just studying. We're not making any final decisions here. We like the idea of continuing up to Highgate Commons to provide users access to that development. But we also heard feedback that this intersection is very big and very busy and could be potentially intimidating to users of a shared use path. So should we consider a crossing back here at Franklin Park West? So we looked at both of those, as well as providing that connectivity to Market 32 down here was desirable. So looking at those crossing points, both up in the air, again, worth noting everything on this. This is a study. This is a planning study. So we're here to hear from you. We're here to present the options to you and the information that we have learned from looking into these, and hear from you as to what is going to be the most desirable option. So, as is kind of standard operating procedure with any sort of alternative development, you then need to look at them side by side, and we did that via these evaluation matrices. So we created 3 different evaluation matrices: traffic considerations, community character impacts, and then kind of expected resource impacts. We looked at all those, and you kind of go side by side down the road, or down the line here. You also always consider a no-build alternative, which generally makes our jobs pretty easy. Because if you don't do anything, then a lot of the things aren't going to change, and it's really not going to meet the purpose and need of the project, or of the study, excuse me. So we looked at, again, the same sort of alternative along one side of the road or the other versus the combined. We assessed kind of the impacts to bicycle access, the impacts to pedestrian access and safety, and the impacts to vehicle safety. As far as safety and access for what we call active transportation modes, i.e. walking and biking, both have significant improvements. We did look at kind of the number of side road crossings for each alternative. You can see there's a bit more if you go end to end on the east side, but you mitigate some of that in that alternative 3 if you were to do the combined option there. Looking at the next kind of metric here called community character, looking at aesthetics, economic impacts, conformance to regional transportation plans. You know, the town has a plan, has a transportation element. There was the previous Route 7 livability study. Northwest Regional Planning Commission has done work and area plans as well. So is this project, or is each alternative meeting the needs of those respective plans? Basically, for the alternatives that look at the shared use path, the answer is yes. It really meets this desire to provide facilities for all users within state, city, and public right-of-way in general. And then this is big, the text is small. We can leave this up here, but this is kind of anticipated impacts as it relates to natural and cultural resources. So we look at, as well as right-of-way and utilities, so that's up top. We don't anticipate any right-of-way impacts because the right-of-way along Route 7 is fairly simple, but if the project were to move into design and there did need to be kind of navigation of the path around areas of sensitivity or existing infrastructure that may not want to be replaced, we flagged as there's a very small potential for impacts outside of the right-of-way, but those would be nothing more than temporary, which just means construction impacts, not kind of permanent easements outside of state right-of-way along the corridor. Utility impacts, there are predominantly overhead and above ground utilities along the corridor that we want to be sensitive to. If we do need to, there would be a coordination process if the project goes into design. I know the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail extension is currently in utility coordination right now for that extension and crossing of Route 7. So that's something that all is a little bit further down the line. Generally can be mitigated or minimized to the best degree possible through coordination and conversation. But then we look at all number of other things. Archaeological resources, again, as I said, we do what's called an archaeological resources assessment as a step in the process here. So our archaeologists did identify that there are some archaeologically sensitive areas along the corridor that would need to potentially be further investigated depending upon the determined alignment for the path if it were to move into design. And then this is just kind of an array of other considerations: hazardous materials, floodplains, fish and wildlife, rare, threatened, and endangered species, wetlands, streams, etc. All things that we just monitor and kind of evaluate against as we're looking at alternatives. So again, if somebody wants to look at this in a little more detail, I can put that back up the screen. I do think we'll also probably share the slides after the fact to anyone interested. With that, I'm going to stop talking, take a drink of water, and we would really love to hear from you all. So any questions, comments, areas of concern? Sir?
Just a clarifying question. The northern terminus, can you just point out just describe where that is?
It's the St. Albans Swanton border. It's kind of in a somewhat arbitrary location, but it's
Just past Jewett.
yeah, basically just past Jewett, I think Ave. Yeah, so it's actually right.
Okay.
That's the border. So here's Jewett, and there's the border right there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, my name's Jim Rutherford, and my facility is on Moose Drive, which is right next to Unford Plaza. And I travel that corridor every day, and it is high speeds and high traffic. And from what I gather from working there every day, the road is undersized currently. Just with the amount of people that don't have a turning lane and they're driving around. So to sort of jam a bike lane in there would cause a lot of concerns for me on the safety of the bikers and the walkers with that amount of congestion, as well as there's a multitude of high traffic businesses, whether it's the car dealerships, the gas stations, Dunkin' Donuts, and what sort of typical application would protect both pedestrians and motorists at every one of those crossings. And the other thing that also comes up is e-bikes now go 35 miles an hour. So are they going to respect every time there's a stop sign on that path? Or is it on the motorists now to constantly be worried about somebody flying through on this new path? So those are some of the concerns that I would have. And the other question I had was, what happens when the path gets to St. Albans City? Does it just transition to their sidewalks?
Yeah, so the first thing you framed as a statement, but you said it was a question. Could you clarify what your first question is? I'll speak to that one, then I can answer the second one.
My question is prior to putting in the shared use path, has there or will there be a traffic study on whether or not the existing Route 7 is adequately sized for what St. Albans is planning on doing?
Yeah, so and I kind of spoke to that with the question about the Franklin Park West development. I think we would recommend, and Chip mentioned that as well, kind of a concern about the volume of left turners coming off Route 7, something we want to be sensitive to. So a traffic study isn't something that would happen as part of this effort, but if the project were to move into the next phase, which is generally design and permitting, that would be a recommendation we could state in the study, that the traffic volume should be counted and analyzed to be sure, to confirm whether or not a two-way left turn lane is something that could be warranted. Currently, it's one of those things where, like you said, you're there every day, so you see it. It's not something that would necessarily show up in the models because there is no two-way left turn lane out there. Cars are just illegally passing, using the bike lane to illegally pass left turners. So as far as a recommendation, based on what you shared, based on what we've heard elsewhere, I think that is one we would make to further look at the traffic if the project were to go into design and permitting. And then as far as your second question goes, when the project gets to the south end, I'm not sure if the city has future plans to kind of tie into this with a similar facility. So if the project were to go to engineering, design, and eventual construction and nothing were to change south of it, I think the idea would be to provide adequate connectivity to the existing sidewalk and bike lane infrastructure that's in the city.
What happens at the crossings? Like, say you got a restaurant that has a parking lot, or even Hunter Plaza, that's currently, 300 feet long. How do you manage people on those crossings? Or how do you manage the pedestrian car traffic together?
Something that you definitely look at a little bit more in engineering design, but I think step one would be asking the question, does the driveway access need to be that wide? If somebody has 300 feet of access, that tells me that doesn't pass the sniff test in terms of an acceptable and reasonable permit for access to a state route. So I'm sure that would be looked at. I'm guessing 300 feet would become better designed into more appropriate access to those properties to provide better circulation and more predictable points of entry and exit to protect those vulnerable users. To your point, like you said, you're concerned about pedestrian safety and crossing these driveways. I think that's very reasonable. I think we want to shrink those crossings to the best degree possible, and I think that kind of twofold benefits walkers and drivers if they have a consistent location where they are turning in and where they would expect those users. That's kind of better access management, I think, is the short answer to that question. But then as far as when you get into the design, signs and markings, increasing warning, increasing conspicuity, rules of the road are rules of the road. You mentioned the idea of bicyclists blowing through a stop sign. I drove here tonight. I'd like to think I stopped at every stop sign behind the wheel of my car, and I bet everyone in here likes to think they would too, but I don't know, I think the stigma around bicyclists and every driver's a saint, every bicyclist is a criminal might be a little misplaced, but I think it's something that we want to kind of put the responsibility on both users. I can't speak to behaviors, but you hope to design it right. You hope, one of the things I always say is you can't design for non-compliance, but you can design for safety. So that's something that we or another consultant, if the project moves in engineering design, would need to do. Yeah. But certainly something we've heard, and something that just last month, for the first time in 12 years, a new document came out by AASHTO, I mentioned it briefly, that has all manner of new research countermeasures to try to improve safety at that, because side paths separated from the roadway are just becoming a very popular facility type because it's what people want to use. They don't like to share space. Drivers don't like to share space with bicyclists. Bicyclists don't want to share space with drivers. One of these things weighs 30 pounds. One of these things weighs multiple thousand pounds. And so that separation is desired. But when you get to those conflict points, it's really a bad point of friction. And so there's a lot of new countermeasures around, should you raise the driveway so drivers really slow down and turn, or should you just mark it if raising it isn't feasible for cost or drainage purposes? A lot to consider when you get into that design and that nitty-gritty. So all things that would be looked at further, I would certainly be sensitive to. Yeah, sounds great.
This is great. You guys done a good job of doing evaluations on the different alternatives. I still go back to the problem is the study is based on current conditions, where we should be looking forward as to what's going to happen out there. Kind of what his take is, I think the impact table you had and all the assumptions are, you had the picture of what out there by Price Copper, by Kenny, where that building is there, showing the distance, like right here on the right-hand side. This assumes a green space there, you're showing it 4 feet. If that road was to widen out south of that, going in toward the city, that's going to change that look in the assumptions and the alternatives completely.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of tough to say, this is what we like alternative 2, and then go into design phase when all the alternatives aren't looking at the future build-outs that's going to happen in that part of the woods. I'll say Albans. That road is much too narrow when you get in toward Hungerford Plaza. It's way overloaded. as he has stated. So the alternative, when you're looking at the evaluation as to what one works best, I think you really have to base it on, let's make the assumption that that road's going to double the width. It's going to be 2 lanes there, or at least a left. Where do those impacts now happen? Because you're kind of it's kind of being sold in the table form. Here's where the impacts, historical impacts, the setback impacts are. That's under today's world, but we've got to move forward. The traffic isn't going to get less. It's going to get more as that end of town develops more and more. And I would assume there's going to be more residential built out that way, condos or whatever. There's plenty of land out that way. The use is going to get really heavy. And where is that going to be? If you design and build this as it is today, in 10 years, you're going to say, we're going to have to rip it all up and move it again. Why not look at what would be the impact alternative for if you ever widen the road? If you widen the road so much, then these are the impact, the new impacts. Because that's what we're going to need in 15 years.
Okay, I think the short answer to that is you work with what you got. I mean, I think, is there a planned expansion of the road?
It's a state road, so.
Right.
We're not aware.
So I think it would be interesting to look at an alternative for hypothetical. I understand what you're saying, but if there's not a planned or permitted expansion of the road, we kind of have to work with the information we have. The information we have is what's within the right of way. I think if you look at that, though, you're looking at a massive reconstruction of a road. All of those utilities are in public right of way. All those utilities are moving. I think that would be a massive project, but it would be, I think if I came up here and showed you a shared use path going through all those parking lots in the southern end saying, well, there might be an additional lane, I don't know if that would be as helpful. I don't know.
I think you need to plan for the future and with the assumption that, I think everybody in this room would agree, I'm hoping everybody would agree, that end of town's going to grow. The traffic is very heavy now, it's probably going to increase.
Understood.
So as that increases, you're going to have to move it. So why not plan for that movement now, save the state and all the agony and having to go through this again. I just think it's an alternative you should look at, put it out there and say, these would be if we ever had to move it out.
Sure.
And then you can make an evaluation of whether you want to spend the money again later to move it out farther. But at least we have an idea what the impacts would be.
Yeah, I think at a high level, if we were to arbitrarily place it more outside of where we currently are, I think you'd be probably looking at a much higher potential for impacts outside of the right of way. And I know that'd go over like a lead balloon. So something to think about.
So if they ever did that, then that would mean you'd have to either narrow the green strip or the path would have to be 8 foot.
Doesn't sound to me, sir, like 2 to 4 feet's gonna get me what you're after.
Well, you got 4 feet, that's what I'm saying, but it would have to come out of this space you're allocated for.
I can't. I'm not going to speak to something I haven't investigated. So, I'm not putting anything in writing that I haven't looked into. So, yeah.
Just hoping that you might be able to speak to typical V-Trans. I think they've moved away from road widening and enlargement projects. That I don't know if that's fairly common right now. I don't know if you want to speak to that sort of like concern about, is that?
I'm certainly not going to speak on behalf of V-Trans. I think what you might be referring to, though, is generally speaking, what we're seeing is roadways are often, or have been historically over-designed, and so the state is looking to reallocate space and, generally speaking, reduce the number of traffic lanes. I think it's all relative. If there's an area where we are hearing a lot of local observations that traffic is congested, I think that carries equal weight just in the opposite direction. So if a road is under designed, I think that matters too. We're saying here, we weren't tasked with doing a traffic impact study. We weren't tasked with saying if it's 4 lanes, it's going to do this. We were tasked with looking at accommodating walkers and bikers. So that's what I can speak to. And so when we see available space within the within the right of way and then within the paved surface of the existing roadway envelope, that's what we're looking at. This is a great opportunity to reallocate that space. If somebody did want to speak up and request from the town, request from the state a traffic study to say, I think you should be reallocating the space for travel lanes, I think that's very fair. That's not in the scope of what we looked at. But Generally speaking, yes, the state is looking to reallocate impervious space for different roads. Yes, I feel like I said. Yes, sir.
Was there any consideration as far as using the rail trail, coming off the rail trail? Or you always want to keep it on the main drag?
In what sense? Sorry.
Well, if you're coming up and you cross the road, okay, and then you get on the rail trail, Mississippi Valley Rail Trail.
Let me get us a map here. So you're talking if you're coming up here?
Yeah, and you cross over and you get on the rail trail.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you could cut across to bring you back down in front of, I think there's a bank out there?
Oh, like come loop back here?
Yeah, but not that directly that far out, but bring it, so that way I think a lot of people here have the same concerns as far as traffic in that area at the north end of town where there's the small businesses that have been there forever, and they're going to lose a lot of space as far as the space that's provided to them now. And
Could you clarify that?
well, you're talking like the restaurant, St. Albans City Diner.
Yep.
I mean, they're going to lose up to 20 feet right there. That's going to put it right at the front door. You're going to walk out of the door and you're going to be right in the bike path, within 6 feet probably. So again, it's a high traffic area.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, can you come off and go on the rail trail, come up the rail trail, and then you're behind the businesses, those small businesses that have been there forever, and then cut path down through, they got those new townhouses in that area. I don't understand why you couldn't incorporate that. And then you're on, then you're on the beaten path and out of that, I want to say that commercial area,
Yeah, so you're talking about somehow just tie back in. So this is Seymour Road right here,
Yes.
105.
Yes.
Tie back in there somehow?
Yes.
So just basically try to route down the path and then design a path along 105 to
Right,
tie
and
back
then you
into
pick up
107.
the traffic also from the townhouses areas for the Seymour area.
Yeah, that was not looked at. We can talk about that as a project team if that's a consideration we want to make and or part of the alternative we potentially want to further evaluate. That wasn't, the confines of this was really kind of along the Route 7 right away, so that's why we didn't really go out of that envelope, but we could just talk about it.
Was there any pedestrian or bicycle count for the current use along the road, or any projections on what this sort of investment would actually produce for a projected count?
There were no counts done. Generally speaking, on something like this, where there are limited or no facilities, those are often seen as not terribly useful because the fact is this is a hostile environment to walk and bike in. Therefore, there's probably not a lot of people doing it. If you remove that hostility, those numbers are going to go up. There are some tools available. That's a question we get a lot. All right, well, if we do this, how many people are going to use it? And we'd love to be able to say with certainty X amount, but a lot of those exercises are kind of hypothetical and based on factors that aren't exactly, they're still kind of works in progress, those tools. They're in development. So they're nothing that we currently rely on to say, yeah, you would expect 200 people to use this a day. Like those tools aren't there yet. Unfortunately, those kind of model forecasting tools for walkers and bikers. It's a little less versus like traffic. You can easily go out and count the cars and apply growth factors that have all been proven in research because all of that's been going on for cars for a little bit new ideas that are still under development for counting and inventorying walkers and bikers.
So the right-of-way doesn't get any more, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
The right-of-way is the right-of-way, right? It's not getting any wider without the town and the state purchasing any more land.
Correct.
So to consume your right-of-way for a hypothetical return that no one really knows, from what I'm hearing, it's crystal ball, seems somewhat short-sighted on the town's part when that's your growth center.
Noted.
Can we talk about alternative 3 for a moment in your the crossings that you had identified?
Yep.
So I think in the first iteration of this like, I didn't see this picture, so I love multiple crossings. And I think that this is really important to look at because people don't always always follow where they're supposed to go anyway, but especially in this area of town, you have desirable locations on both sides of the road in a heavier setting. So I think that having a couple of crossings is the right way to go instead of just one. There's certainly, what does the future hold for the area, especially with the TOD plan and study that's happening. But I think that it's a little bit of double work and, whatever, but just thinking from a pedestrian and a safety crossing perspective, having multiple crossings and having access to these facilities on both sides of the road, I think would be really helpful for folks using the area.
Okay, good to know, thank you. Yeah, that was something we struggled with and why we kind of wanted to pose both of them, because we heard, understanding there's going to be the new development in Franklin West Park, and that could be a more desirable crossing there than up north, but if we stopped it there, are we stopping people short of getting to the bank, the McDonald's, the Highgate Commons Center there? And then the same thing on the west side. If we stop it up at Highgate Commons Road, are we stopping people short of any other destinations, Kinney, et cetera, there? And so something to be mindful of if it does work out where two crossings is reasonable and desirable. I think that's something that could work its way into the preferred alternative.
The idea that you have paths on either side, on both sides then potentially?
In that short section, that would be a consideration if we were to consider two crossing points. I think you would want the alternative being, if you weren't to include those facilities there, you probably wouldn't do the crossing in the first place. You want them to have a place to land. You don't just want to dump them in what would otherwise be a shared space with motor vehicles. Yes?
Is there any consideration for a crossing at the southern end of the city? Because, I'm from the city and I would agree about the traffic. Because I live on North Main Street and sometimes you wait for 10, 15 minutes to get out of your driveway. So if you're on the wrong side of the bike path, to get over to the bike path, you're going to need a crossing. Because the only other crossing is down in Lower Newton, which is into the city.
So you're talking about just like a crossing, like a pedestrian crossing down here?
A pedestrian crossing, also, if you're going to have the bike path, people to get onto the bike path, they're going to have to cross.
For anyone, yeah. So the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trails, I understand, is in design and permitting to extend south, and that would be inclusive of a crossing here?
I'm talking about, that would be the closest crossing then would be way into the city. It's hard to get across the street unless you have to walk towards the city to cross Main Street now to have a light. And so if you're going to have people hooking onto the bike path, it seems that there needs to be a crossing. It may be a city issue as opposed to a town issue, but there needs to be a crossing.
You're talking about somewhere in here?
No, south.
Oh, outside of the project area?
Well, the project area begins, in Missisquoi or the town?
Just south, right at the kind of town-city line here. I think it's technically 248, the Hungerford Plaza.
I'm talking about at the city line.
Okay, so where the sidewalks are? Yeah.
Well, there's no sidewalk at Hungerford. That's all
No.
parking lot.
Well, and that's there's sidewalks, I think it ends right just south of here, but the long and the short of it is to put a crossing, you need a place to land on both sides of the road. So unless everyone wants, if you want crossings the whole way or even to the south, you would need landings and places for those walkers or bikers to travel on both sides of the road.
If you went to, I can't remember what it used to be Fitness on that parking lot. There's a place where you could cross over. It's a little bit further, but that is in the city.
Right, so consider, either way, the point is consider additional crossing locations to access the path. Yeah, I think we can certainly look into that. The one thing we would need is reasonable places to land on both sides of the road and for people to continue their journey either on foot or on bike.
So somebody mentioned e-bikes. Is there any rules? This is, I suppose, so bicycles? Is there a separation? Is the rules around e-bikes that, I guess maybe you're doing a development work, but I was just curious if there's general knowledge about the e-bike that,
Are there any rules of the road particular to e-bikes?
like, I think there's different types, maybe type 1, type 2, type 3, and I think the type 3s are going to 35 miles an hour and stuff like that. Is there rules where that, and when you're a type 3, you have to be on a road as opposed to onto a,
I don't know. I don't think so, but e-bike law is not something I've looked into. And I know there's in the guide I mentioned that was just published 4 weeks ago. That was a pretty significant update. This was the 5th edition of the guide, and it was the first update in 12 years. And I know there's significant information on e-bikes in that. That's not like a rule-making document, but I think there's likely some guidance in there. That's something that I'll become familiar with in my work in the year to come, but I have not, unfortunately, dug too deep into that yet. Yes?
Zach Schiffler, St. Albans City. As a user of the rail trail, some of the work out here, Highgate Commons, and as family pass the rail trail, this project is really exciting to me. I have a bike, and the safety concerns with the current situation are very familiar to me. The roadway and its use case for bicyclists as it stands now is almost non-existent past the rail trail. But what I was curious about was if there were, as part of this study, do you have any indication of what type of grading the path will be made of, or if they'll be changing grade from pavement to stone or anything like that in between each of the trail changes?
Not something that would necessarily be studied. Certainly, engineering, design, and permitting decision. I would be shocked if it was not a paved surface.
Thanks so much.
From a resilience, lifespan standpoint, a lot of paved side paths, and then two, if you're considering the crossing, as I mentioned, driveways, if you have motor vehicles driving across it, you want something sturdy. Crossings could even be concrete, but I would think, two, with any sort of fine-graded material like that, adjacent to motor vehicles, it just gets relocated nonstop. You'll see fine-graded aggregate on something like the MBRT or the LVRT because those are independent alignments and they're fairly contained. But so something like this, I would say 99 times out of 100 is going to be a paved surface. Yep.
Assuming it was put in the way, one of the alternatives you chose here, who owns the responsibility for maintenance? Is that a town picks that up? Or is it state, because it's along a state road? Just curious about who's going to plow it in the winter and take care of it, all year round.
Generally speaking, there's what are called memorandums of understanding between the state and the town. I think the town maintains the sidewalks, so I think it would kind of fit into that bill. So it would likely be on the town to maintain the path.
so you guys do a lot of these kind of studies. I mean, this is a fairly congested route. Have you had other cases where you guys have done these kind of recommendations and they've come to fruition? Is there best practices that have actually happened in this kind of situation? Have you looked at it?
Yeah, basically, are there case studies for a similar
Or
area?
somebody's done it, like
Similar,
a town
yeah.
that has similar, road.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think off the cuff if there's anything fairly local that has Dorset Street in South Burlington, much higher volumes, many more, or as many, if not more, driveways. They have shared use paths on both sides of Dorset Street in South Burlington. They're actually about to resurface one, so they're putting their capital dollars into improving those facilities. They connect to schools, they connect to local resources like grocery stores. That comes to mind. I'm trying to think if there's anything in design right now. Route 2A in Williston, if you're familiar, coming from Essex up to Williston, you got the car wash, you got the Shell station, you got the Agway, True Value, you got all sorts of things there. There's a side path, you got entries and exits to neighborhoods, private drives. So there's a few side paths around the state. They're the chosen facility type, I think, for a lot of municipalities, because what we're seeing is shared space with the roadway in Vermont is just not a very desirable condition if you're a vulnerable roadway user. Yes.
I just want to say that I'm very excited to see this project come to fruition. I know it's been in discussion for a long time. I was involved in the feasibility study that was done 10 years ago. And we had gone out at the time and talked to people working out there or taking the shuttle to get their groceries, and people who don't have access to a vehicle. And there was a kid who was working at Dunkin' Donuts who lives out by the complex. He's like, yes, I have to walk here 3 days a week to get to work. I mean, those stories are all over the place, and we've all seen people walking and biking there under really treacherous, dangerous situations. So this is serving like a real public health need. And I also think for the businesses along that corridor, it's a whole nother market they can tap into. I mean, bike tourism is growing around the state. The Memorial Rail Trail is drawing more people, more businesses. We connect to that. If people know they can scoot up the street safely with their family and buy something, they probably will. So I think it's like a little bit of a mind shift of it. It's a real opportunity for this region to draw, not only help the people who are struggling, but also draw in some of that out-of-state tourism money.
Thank you. Yes.
Just thinking about some of the concerns with growth in the area, and they're valid. But also, it was mentioned about that may be an area where there would be some residential growth. This woman's point being, oftentimes these areas can become islands in terms of any sort of bicycle or pedestrian movement. So it could be a boon and just sort of change some of the dynamic with what's there for commercial business. There's a lot of commercial business. Some of them don't seem to be at their fullest, and that may just sort of change the vitality that's there. I've just seen it around the state. Development like this. So. It's just a sort of counterpoint to the growth thing, and I think the growth thing is a valid one in terms of what will the road need for traffic, because that is a reality. We're now on the cyclist, but I don't always hop on my bike, especially days like today. I'm going to get groceries at Hanover, but at the same time, that ability to maybe have some different types of shops along there that will attract mom, dad, a kid, or a cyclist. That sort of thing. So, just another way to look at it, a whole new condo development or set of homes gets put, off of the corridor.
Providing a mobility options for all users is something we hear a lot of it. I'm fortunate enough to own a car, not everyone is, and so one of the things that really irks me is when somebody says, "Who's going to use that in the winter?" My answer is the people that have no other choice. The people that are often make that point are car owners. It's a privilege to own a car and to have that access. It's really easy to forget about that not everyone does. And so not only does not everyone own a car, but they also don't have safe ways to get to things that they need. And so that's what I think the state and the towns within the state are really seeking to do, is provide reasonable transportation options to necessities for communities. And I think that's what this, I think that is a little bit of what we get here for sure. Anybody else? Any questions or comments?
Just real quick, let's go over the proposed layout. Is the path that you're just, the most popular choice, is it starting at the rail trail on the east side of the road and then going to Franklin Park West and then possibly crossing and then continuing in the west? Is that the one that's the, I guess, the most popular thought?
I would lean on everyone here to tell me what the most popular thought is, but as far as the exercise we did, which we kind of called this desirability assessment, that kind of scores the highest of people.
Okay.
Yeah, just based on the things that we looked at, but you tell us if it doesn't for you.
And again, this was all based, your alternatives were all based on current patterns and current businesses and developments, not looking into the planning commission for
on the development kind of research that we're doing as a town. So we have multiple studies ongoing, this one specifically about the sidewalks. We have a current study called a transit-oriented development study that's ongoing that is looking at this growth center and the growth that's going to happen and facilities to accommodate that growth. So they're kind of together, but separate at the same time. So we are looking at it, just not specifically, unfortunately, with BHB. There's another consultant that is doing those kind of studies for us.
Everybody here wants to see it.
I know.
All right, any other questions? All right, well, just on that, I'll briefly share kind of where we go from here. And don't worry, it's not, we're building it tomorrow.
There's a question. Is there a thought on construction? Is there a proposed idea or plan if in the future all this were to play out, work out? Is there any idea when it could happen? Is there?
I could just share anecdotally from my own personal experience with a study like this. So just to get through where we go from here, so we will work with the project team based on what we've heard from here to select and refine a preferred alternative. Sometimes we could do a straw poll to say which would you prefer, 1, 2, 3, or nothing. We would develop the draft scoping report, which will be kind of a summation of all of our findings, tightly packaged into a scoping report. We then present that to the select board for approval and finalize it. From there, we submit it to the town and the state, and then it's up to folks from there what they'd like to do. The next logical step, if it is determined that the project would like to move forward into design and permitting, would be to try to secure funding, unless there's already an available resource. Generally speaking, towns will seek state or federal funding for a project of this magnitude for design and construction. This is a fairly significant, it would be a fairly significant project just in terms of length. You know, I'm doing a sidewalk. This is a very similar study for a sidewalk in the village of Tunbridge, 900 feet of sidewalk, you know, equally impactful to that community, but a much different scale. But I would think the next logical step would be to seek either state or federal funding. That could generally take up to a year. If that is then secured, then you would move into design and permitting. A facility like this, I would venture to say that design and permitting, and talking about environmental approvals, right-of-way processes, you're looking at a multi-year process. They don't, depending on the nature of the funding, that can control the timeline. If a project is federally funded, we'll slow things down a little bit because there's a few more boxes you have to check. So I would say probably 2 to 4 years for designing and permitting. So a year or 2 to secure funding. If the town decides to immediately go after and successfully has a grant application, 2 to 4 years for design and permitting, and then into construction. So you're looking at maybe a 5 to 10 year project in total.
Approximately how many feet from start to end?
How many feet?
Yeah.
About 2 miles. Is that what you mean?
10,000?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 1.84 miles. So yeah, just shy of 10,000. So that's where we go from here. There's myself again. I'm Drew. Megan, our points of contact there. If you'd like to reach out, if any questions come up in your mind in the coming days, and you're curious, please reach out. We will be responsive. And our next step is going to be to take what we heard today, meet as a project team, to kind of land on what we think would be the preferred alternative, and then, proceed from there with the development of the draft scoping report.
Now I have a question.
Oh, now.
Is there any chance that you, Megan, can sit down when the COD committee comes up here so that we have everybody looking at this particular area so we don't cross with each other?
Keeping them up to date.
Yeah, we've shared designs or alternatives with them, but
No, I'm thinking with the public too.
do it.
With the public.
Oh, yeah,
We have all 3 consultants here.
maybe. It's a possibility.
As I mentioned at the conference already, I haven't seen any conflict between the two.
Yeah, I'll let, if an opportunity presents itself, we're always open to collaborating and or participating participating in all the public processes to hear what else is being said, as it will likely inform any decisions we make on the outcomes of this study. Well, that's all I got. Yeah, going once, going twice. Thank you all again for your time. I appreciate everybody's civility and respect. Always nice.
Thank you.
Take care.